The thunder of hooves drowned out Josephine Zimmerman's desperate pleas as she chased after her father's wagon. Dust coating her tear-streaked face in the scorching New Mexico Territory heat of 1875. Her heart pounded with the terrifying knowledge that her father was taking her to settle a debt he intended to pay with her life. "Pa, please," she cried, stumbling over the rocky ground. "There must be another way." Abraham Zimmerman didn't even glance back at his 20-year-old daughter. His hands gripped the reins tighter, his shoulders hunched with shame or determination. Josephine couldn't tell which. All she knew was that the drought had ruined their small ranch, and her father had fallen into debt with Harlan Voss, the most feared man in Silverwood County. "Ain't no other way, Josie," he finally called back, his voice cracking. "Voss wants payment, and we ain't got nothing else to give." The wagon slowed as they approached the imposing ranch house that served as Voss's headquarters. The sprawling property stood in stark contrast to the struggling farms and ranches that surrounded it. Somehow, Voss's cattle remained fat, his fields green, while everyone else withered under the relentless sun. Josephine's legs ached from running, but fear propelled her forward. She'd heard whispers about Voss's cruelty, how he collected not just money but people, especially young women. Some said he sold them to brothels in larger towns, others claimed he kept them for himself. None were ever seen again. As they pulled up to the hitching post, Josephine finally caught up to the wagon. She grabbed her father's arm as he climbed down. "Pa, I'm begging you, he'll destroy me." Abraham's weathered face crumpled. "I'm sorry, girl. 3 years of bad harvests, the cattle dying. He owns everything now." "Even you?" Before Josephine could respond, the heavy oak door of the ranch house swung open. Harlan Voss stepped onto the porch, his imposing figure blocking the light from inside. At 50, he carried himself with the arrogance of a man who owned not just land but people's fates. His silver-streaked hair and expensive clothing made him look more like an Eastern businessman than a frontier rancher. "Zimmerman," Voss called out, his voice carrying across the yard, "I see you finally come to settle accounts." Abraham straightened his back, attempting dignity despite his threadbare clothes and the dust coating his boots. "I ain't got the money, Voss, you know that." "Indeed." Voss descended the steps slowly, his eyes settling on Josephine with undisguised interest. "But you've brought something of value, I see." Josephine shuddered under his gaze. She stood tall despite her fear, her brown eyes flashing with defiance even as her hands trembled at her sides. "My daughter," Abraham said, his voice hollow. "Josephine, she's a hard worker, good with figures. Can cook and sew better than most." Voss circled her, evaluating her as one might a horse at auction. "Turn around, girl." "I will not," Josephine replied, her voice stronger than she felt. A muscle twitched in Voss's jaw. He reached out to grab her chin, but Josephine stepped back, maintaining the small dignity of refusing his touch. "Spirited," Voss commented with a cold smile. "I like that. Makes it more satisfying when they finally break." Abraham stared at the ground, shame evident in every line of his body. "She'll work off my debt. $300. Should take her, what, a year or so?" Voss laughed, the sound sending chills down Josephine's spine. "A pretty thing like her is worth more than just household work, Zimmerman, you know that." The implication hung in the air between them, making Josephine's stomach turn. Before her father could respond, the sound of approaching horsemen drew their attention. 3 riders appeared on the horizon, dust billowing behind them as they made their way toward the ranch house. Josephine recognized the lead rider immediately, Nathan Steele, a cowboy who worked for the neighboring Double J Ranch. She'd seen him in town occasionally, exchanging polite nods but little conversation. He was known as a skilled horseman and a fair hand, the kind of man others respected without necessarily knowing well. As they drew closer, Josephine could see Nathan's expression harden as he took in the scene before him. His dark hair curled beneath his hat, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. At 25, he had the weathered look of a man who'd spent his life under the harsh western sun. "Afternoon, Voss," Nathan called, tipping his hat as he dismounted. The 2 men behind him, ranch hands Josephine didn't recognize, remained on their horses, watching silently. "Steele," Voss acknowledged with obvious irritation. What brings you to my property? Nathan approached casually, spurs jingling with each step. Mr. Johnston sent me to discuss water rights for the creek that borders our properties. His eyes flicked to Josephine, then to Abraham, clearly assessing the situation. This isn't a good time, Voss said dismissively. I'm conducting business. Seems like an unusual sort of business, Nathan commented, his voice deceptively light as he moved closer to Josephine and Abraham. Mr. Zimmerman, Miss Zimmerman, he greeted them with a respectful nod. Steele, Abraham mumbled, unable to meet the younger man's eyes. This doesn't concern you, Voss snapped. The Zimmermans owe me money. We're working out a payment arrangement. Nathan's eyes narrowed. Is that right? He turned to Abraham. How much do you owe, sir? Before Abraham could answer, Voss stepped between them. $300 plus interest. A debt that's been growing for over a year now. Josephine watched as Nathan absorbed this information, his face revealing nothing, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle straightening of his spine. And you're planning to take payment in the form of this young lady? Nathan asked, his voice suddenly hard. My arrangements with my debtors aren't your concern, Cowboy, Voss sneered. Josephine found her voice. My father believes I should work as Mr. Voss's servant to pay off the debt, she said carefully. Unwilling to speak aloud the true nature of what Voss intended, Nathan's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or a promise. He reached up and removed his hat, a gesture of respect that seemed out of place in the tense standoff. Then, with deliberate slowness, Nathan threw his hat to the ground between himself and Voss. I'll pay the debt, he announced. All of it. Voss's eyebrows rose. You don't have that kind of money, Cowboy. I'll pay with love, Nathan said firmly, his eyes never leaving Josephine's shocked face. Miss Zimmerman deserves better than to be traded like cattle. I'm offering marriage. The silence that followed his declaration was absolute. Even the birds seemed to hold their songs in anticipation. Marriage, Abraham finally sputtered. You hardly know my daughter. I know enough, Nathan replied. I know she's honest and hardworking. I've seen her in town, helping others even when you folks were struggling yourselves. He turned back to Voss. And I know that no debt is worth a person's freedom. Voss's face darkened with anger. This is ridiculous. The girl is mine by right. The debt must be paid. And it will be, Nathan assured him, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out a small leather pouch and tossed it to Voss. That's $100. I'll pay the rest in installments with interest. Voss opened the pouch, counting the money with practiced fingers. His expression remained skeptical. And how does a cowboy come by this kind of money? I've been saving for my own spread for years, Nathan replied evenly. Been living lean and putting away every penny. Josephine found herself staring at the stranger who was offering to sacrifice his dreams to save her from a nightmare. Mr. Steele, she began, I can't let you. It's my choice, Miss Zimmerman, Nathan interrupted gently. And I'd consider it an honor if you'd at least consider my proposal. Abraham looked between his daughter and the cowboy, confusion and hope warring on his face. You'd marry her. Take on my debt. Yes, sir, Nathan answered without hesitation. Voss's laugh cut through the moment. This is touching, truly, but marriage doesn't settle a debt. I want my money, not some romantic gesture. You'll get your money, Nathan assured him. I'll sign a contract right now. But Miss Zimmerman leaves with me today. The standoff continued for several tense moments, with Voss clearly calculating his options. Finally, he shrugged. Fine, I'll have my man draw up the papers, but if you miss a single payment, Steele, I'll take more than just your money. As Voss retreated into the house to arrange the contract, Josephine approached Nathan, her heart pounding. Why would you do this for a stranger? She asked quietly. Nathan's eyes were kind but determined. No one should be traded for debt, Miss Zimmerman. Especially not someone as respected in the community as you. But marriage, she pressed, that's a lifetime commitment. It doesn't have to be, he surprised her by saying. Once the debt is paid, if you wish to go your own way, I won't stop you. I'm offering you a way out, not another prison. His honesty stunned her. Before she could respond, Voss returned with papers, and the next hour passed in a blur of signatures and tense negotiations. By sunset, Josephine found herself riding away from Voss's ranch, seated behind Nathan on his horse. her father following on his wagon, all of them heading toward the Double J Ranch where Nathan worked and lived. The sense of relief at escaping Voss's clutches was overwhelming, but it was tempered by uncertainty about what her future now held with the quiet cowboy who had thrown down his hat and changed her fate with 4 simple words: "I'll pay with love." The journey to the Double J Ranch passed in relative silence. Josephine clung to Nathan's waist, acutely aware of his solid presence as the horse carried them through the darkening landscape. Behind them, her father's wagon creaked along, the sound a familiar backdrop to her turbulent thoughts. "Mr. Johnston knows about our arrangement," she finally asked, breaking the silence. "Not yet," Nathan admitted, "but he's a fair man. Once I explain, he'll understand." He paused before adding, "We have a small cabin on the property. It was built for married hands, been empty for some time now." The implication hung in the air between them. Though they weren't truly married yet, they would soon be sharing that space, a thought that filled Josephine with a confusing mixture of gratitude and apprehension. When they arrived at the ranch, the main house was still lit despite the late hour. Robert Johnston, owner of the Double J, stepped onto the porch as they approached. A tall man in his 50s with a silver-streaked beard, he regarded the unusual party with open curiosity. "Steele," he called. "Didn't expect you back tonight, and with company no less." Nathan dismounted, then helped Josephine down with gentle hands. "Mr. Johnston, this is Miss Josephine Zimmerman and her father, Abraham. We've had an unexpected situation arise." As Nathan explained the events at Voss's ranch, Johnston's expression shifted from surprise to concern to grudging respect. He glanced at Josephine several times during the telling, his assessment kind but thorough. "So you've pledged to marry the lady and take on her father's debt," Johnston summarized when Nathan finished. "That's quite a commitment for a man who's been saving for his own land." "It was the right thing to do," Nathan said simply. Johnston nodded slowly. "The married hand's cabin needs work, but it's yours if you want it, both of you." His gaze shifted to Abraham. "Mr. Zimmerman, we can find space for you in the bunkhouse tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure out a more permanent arrangement." Abraham nodded, his exhaustion evident. "Thank you kindly. It's more than we deserve after I—" His voice trailed off, unable to finish the admission of what he'd nearly done to his own daughter. "None of that now," Johnston said firmly. "What's done is done. Let's look forward." After showing Abraham to the bunkhouse, Johnston led Nathan and Josephine to the small cabin at the edge of the ranch property. It was a simple structure, one room with a small kitchen area, a pot-bellied stove, and a bed that suddenly seemed very prominent to Josephine's eyes. "It needs a woman's touch," Johnston commented, lighting the lamps. "But it's solid. Roof doesn't leak." "It's perfect," Josephine said automatically, though her mind was racing with the implications of sharing such intimate quarters with a man she barely knew. When Johnston left them, an awkward silence descended. Nathan moved to the stove, checking if there was wood nearby. "I'll sleep outside tonight," he said finally, his back still turned to her. "Give you time to settle in. Tomorrow we can talk about arrangements." Relief washed through her. "Thank you," she whispered. Nathan nodded, still not looking at her. "There are some supplies in the cupboards, probably not much, but enough for breakfast. I'll bring more from the main house tomorrow." As he moved toward the door, Josephine found herself reaching out to stop him. Her fingers brushed his arm and he went still. "Mr. Steele," she began. "Nathan," he corrected gently. "If we're to be married, even in name only, you should call me Nathan." "Nathan," she repeated, testing the name. "I just wanted to say thank you, what you did today. I can never repay you." He turned to face her then, his expression earnest. "You don't have to repay me, Miss Zimmerman. No decent man could have stood by and let Voss treat you like property." "Josephine," she offered with a small smile. "Or Josie, if you prefer." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Josephine suits you better, I think. It's elegant." A flush crept into his cheeks at the compliment, and he quickly turned toward the door again. "I'll be just outside if you need anything. Good night." "Good night, Nathan," she replied softly as he closed the door behind him. Left alone, Josephine surveyed what was to be her new home. Despite its simplicity, the cabin felt like a sanctuary after the horrors the day had nearly brought. She found a basin and pitcher, grateful to wash away the dust of travel and fear. As she prepared for bed, she caught a glimpse of herself in a small mirror hanging on the wall. The face that looked back at her seemed different, somehow older, perhaps, or simply changed by the dramatic shift her life had taken in a single day. She was to be married to a stranger. A kind stranger who had sacrificed his dreams for her safety, but a stranger nonetheless. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she found herself curious about the quiet cowboy who had thrown his hat down in her defense. Outside, Nathan settled himself against the cabin wall, wrapping his blanket around his shoulders as he stared up at the star-filled sky. He hadn't planned any of this. When he'd ridden to Voss's ranch that afternoon, water rights had been his only concern. Now he was engaged to be married, $300 in debt, and his carefully laid plans for his own ranch were in shambles. Yet he couldn't bring himself to regret his actions. The memory of Voss circling Josephine like a vulture made his blood boil even now. No, he couldn't have ridden away and left her to that fate. He closed his eyes, trying to get comfortable on the hard ground. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, explaining to the other hands, making wedding arrangements, figuring out how to work with Abraham after what the man had nearly done. But for tonight, knowing Josephine was safe on the other side of the wall he leaned against was enough. Dawn broke with the sounds of the ranch coming to life, distant cattle lowing, horses nickering, men calling to one another as they began their day's work. Josephine woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up quickly, smoothing her rumpled dress and attempting to tame her sleep-tangled hair. A soft knock at the door made her heart jump. "Josephine, it's Nathan. I've brought some breakfast and fresh water." "Just a moment," she called, hastily splashing water on her face from what remained in the basin. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. Nathan stood there, looking as though he'd already been up for hours. His hair was damp, his face freshly shaved, and he carried a tray loaded with food biscuits, bacon, and what smelled like real coffee. "Mrs. Henderson at the main house sent this over," he explained, stepping inside when she moved aside. "She's the cook. Nice woman, if a bit nosy." Word travels fast on a ranch. Josephine felt her cheeks warm. "So everyone knows about our arrangement." "They know we're to be married," Nathan confirmed, setting the tray on the small table. "The rest of it, Voss, the debt, that's private. Your father is with Mr. Johnston now, discussing possible work here." She nodded, grateful for his discretion. When will we?" She couldn't quite bring herself to say wedding. "I spoke with the preacher in town first thing this morning," Nathan said, pouring coffee into 2 cups. "He can perform the ceremony this Sunday after services, if that suits you. 4 days. 4 days until she would be Mrs. Nathan Steele." The thought was overwhelming. "That's fine," she managed, accepting the cup he offered. Their fingers brushed, and she noticed a smudge of dirt on his hand. "Did you sleep outside all night?" He nodded, sipping his coffee. "It wasn't so bad. I've slept rougher on cattle drives." "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "It seemed proper," he replied with a simple dignity that touched her. They ate in companionable silence, Josephine sneaking glances at her future husband when she thought he wouldn't notice. In the clear morning light, she could see him better than she had the day before. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with laugh lines around his eyes suggesting he smiled more often than she'd seen so far. His hands were calloused but gentle, and he moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. "I have to work today," he said eventually, breaking the silence. "But I thought perhaps you might want to go into town, get some supplies, things you'll need." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pouch. "It's not much, but it should cover the basics." Josephine stared at the offered money, emotion tightening her throat. "You've already done so much, I can't take your savings." "It's not charity," he said firmly. "We're to be partners now of a sort. What's mine is yours." "Then I'll find a way to contribute," she insisted. "I'm a good seamstress. Perhaps I could take in mending for the ranch hands." Nathan smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes just as she'd imagined. "That's fair. Mrs. Henderson has the wagon going to town later. She'd welcome your company, I'm sure." After breakfast, Nathan showed her around the immediate area, the well behind the cabin, the small patch that could be turned into a vegetable garden, the path to the main house. As they walked, Josephine spotted her father helping to repair a fence alongside several ranch hands. "He seems to be fitting in," she observed cautiously. Nathan followed her gaze. "Mr. Johnston is giving him a chance. The rest is up to him." Abraham looked up then, noticing them. He hesitated before lifting a hand in greeting. Josephine returned the gesture, her feelings toward her father still a confusing mix of love, hurt, and lingering betrayal. "He made a terrible mistake," Nathan said quietly, "but he's still your father. How can you be so understanding?" she asked. After what he tried to do, Nathan considered this for a moment. "I've seen good men do desperate things when they feel cornered. Doesn't make it right, but it makes it human." He paused before adding, "My own father lost everything to drink and gambling. Sold my mother's wedding ring right off her finger one night. People can disappoint you terribly and still be worth forgiving eventually." The personal revelation surprised her. It was the most he'd shared about himself since they'd met. "What happened to them? Your parents?" "Both gone now," he said matter-of-factly. "Pa never did straighten out. Ma worked herself to death trying to keep us fed. I've been on my own since I was 16. "I'm sorry," she said, truly meaning it. He shrugged. "It was a long time ago, made me determined to be different though. To keep my word, to treat people fair." His eyes met hers. "That's something you should know about me if we're to be married. I don't make promises lightly, and I don't break them once made." The intensity of his gaze made her heart flutter unexpectedly. "That's a good quality in a husband," she managed to say. Later that day, Josephine found herself in the back of a wagon headed to town with Mrs. Henderson, a round-faced woman in her 60s who chattered happily about ranch gossip and the upcoming wedding. "Nathan's a good boy, Mrs. Henderson declared as they bounced along the rutted road. "Been with the Double J for 5 years now. Never gives anybody trouble, works harder than men twice his size. Been saving every penny too, wants his own place someday." Guilt twisted in Josephine's stomach at the reminder of Nathan's sacrificed dreams. "Yes, he mentioned that." Mrs. Henderson glanced at her shrewdly. "Don't you go feeling bad about that, Missy. Nathan's a grown man who makes his own choices. If he chose you over his land, that tells you something about his character, doesn't it?" Put that way, it did indeed. The thought warmed her despite her lingering guilt. In town, Josephine used Nathan's money sparingly, purchasing only the essentials: fabric for a simple wedding dress she would sew herself, some basic toiletries, and a few household items for the cabin. As they shopped, she became uncomfortably aware of the curious stares and whispers that followed them. "Pay them no mind," Mrs. Henderson advised, noticing her discomfort. "Folks will always talk. Week from now, they'll find something else to gossip about." As they passed the general store, the door opened and Harlan Voss himself stepped out, nearly colliding with them. His eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed as he looked Josephine up and down. "Miss Zimmerman," he drawled, tipping his hat with mock politeness. "Or soon-to-be Mrs. Steele, I hear. My congratulations on your hasty nuptials." Josephine straightened her spine, determined not to show fear. "Mr. Voss." "Such a touching story," Voss continued, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The gallant cowboy saving the damsel in distress. I wonder if your father told your intended about the other debts, the ones that aren't in my ledger." Confusion crossed Josephine's face. "What other debts?" Voss smiled coldly. "Ask your father, my dear, and ask him what he offered before he offered you." With a final tip of his hat, he continued down the street, leaving Josephine staring after him. "That man's tongue ought to be cut out," Mrs. Henderson muttered, taking Josephine's arm. "Come along, girl, don't let him get under your skin." But the damage was done. What other debts was Voss referring to? And what had her father offered before he'd offered her? The questions plagued Josephine throughout the rest of their shopping and the journey back to the ranch. When they returned, she found Nathan in the corral, working with a spirited young horse. She watched him for a moment, admiring the way he moved with the animal firm but gentle, speaking in low tones that seemed to calm the nervous creature. As if sensing her presence, he looked up, offering a small smile when he saw her. He said something to another cowboy, then made his way to where she stood by the fence. "How was town?" he asked, wiping his brow with his bandana. Informative, she replied carefully. I ran into Mr. Voss. Nathan's expression darkened. What did he want? To plant seeds of doubt, I think, she admitted. He mentioned other debts my father has, one's not in his ledger, and he said. She hesitated. Go on, Nathan encouraged quietly. He said to ask my father what he offered before he offered me. The words left a bitter taste in her mouth. Nathan's jaw tightened. That snake. Is it true? Do you know? He sighed heavily. I've heard rumors. Your father's been desperate for a while. There was talk in town that he'd been trying to sell off pieces of your property, even though some of it rightfully belonged to you from your mother's side. This was news to Josephine. Her mother had died when she was 15, and she'd always assumed everything had passed to her father. I didn't know. Most folks didn't think much of it. A father managing his daughter's inheritance isn't unusual, but then there were whispers about gambling debts, not just to Voss but to others. He met her eyes directly. I don't know what's true and what isn't. But I do know Voss delights in causing pain. He'd say anything to hurt you, especially now that you've slipped through his fingers. Josephine nodded, trying to sort through her feelings. Thank you for being honest with me. Always, he promised simply. That evening, Josephine sought out her father. She found him sitting alone outside the bunkhouse, smoking a pipe and staring into the distance. Pa, she greeted him, sitting beside him on the rough bench. We need to talk. Abraham looked older than his 50 years, the lines in his face deepened by shame. About what I did, he guessed. Josie, I don't expect you to forgive me, it's not just that, she interrupted. Though we will need to discuss it eventually, I saw Voss in town today. He mentioned other debts, Pa, and something about what you offered him before you offered me. Her father's face crumpled. He set down his pipe with shaking hands. That bastard, he muttered. Can't even let me keep my shame private. So it's true, Josephine pressed. What other debts? What did you offer him? Abraham was silent for so long that Josephine thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Your mother's land, the piece along the creek. It was meant to be yours on your wedding day. I gambled it away to Voss months ago. The betrayal cut deep. That land with its sheltered bend in the creek and the stand of cottonwoods her mother had loved had been special to both of them. How could you? She whispered. I thought I could win it back, Abraham said, his voice breaking. I kept playing, kept losing. Then Voss offered to forgive it all if I'd. He couldn't finish the sentence. If you'd give him me instead, Josephine completed for him. Feeling sick, he nodded miserably. I refused at first, told him he was crazy. But then the drought got worse, and the bank was threatening to take everything, and he kept raising the stakes. He finally met her eyes, his own swimming with tears. I convinced myself it would only be for a year or so, that you'd be fed and housed at least. That I could earn enough to buy your contract back. My contract, Josephine repeated, the words hollow, like I'm a piece of property. I was wrong, Abraham admitted, so wrong I see that now. When that cowboy of yours stood up to Voss, I saw myself through his eyes and I couldn't recognize the man I've become. He reached for her hand tentatively. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Josie, but I'm going to try to earn it. Josephine didn't pull away from his touch, but neither did she return it. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, Pa, but I'm trying to understand. When she returned to the cabin that night, she found Nathan waiting outside with a lantern. He stood as she approached, his expression concerned. You spoke with your father, he guessed. She nodded, suddenly exhausted. He confirmed what Voss implied. He gambled away my mother's land that should have been mine. Nathan's expression darkened with anger, but his voice remained gentle. I'm sorry, Josephine. The worst part is, I understand why he did it, she confessed. Not selling me, I don't think I'll ever understand that, but the gambling, the desperation. We were losing everything. He thought he could fix it with one lucky hand. Men often do, Nathan agreed quietly. They stood in silence for a moment, the lantern casting long shadows around them. Then Nathan cleared his throat. I fixed the leak in the roof today, and Mrs. Henderson sent over some curtains for the windows. Thought it might make the place feel more like home. The simple domesticity of the gesture after the emotional turmoil of the day brought unexpected tears to Josephine's eyes. Thank you, she managed. Nathan looked alarmed at her tears. Did I say something wrong? No, she assured him quickly. It's just been a long day and you've been so kind." He relaxed slightly. "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing, Josephine realized. Every small kindness, every considerate gesture was helping to rebuild the faith in humanity that her father's actions had shattered. And with each passing day, she found herself growing more curious about the quiet cowboy who had thrown his hat down and changed her life. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of activity. Josephine sewed her wedding dress in the evenings, a simple creation of pale blue cotton that brought out the warm tones in her brown hair. During the days, she helped Mrs. Henderson in the main house, learning the rhythms of ranch life and slowly getting to know the people who would now be her community. Nathan worked from dawn till dusk, but always found time to check on her, bringing small gifts, wildflowers picked from the prairie, a carved wooden hairpin he'd traded for with one of the hands, fresh honey from a hive he'd discovered. They began to talk more in the evenings, sitting outside the cabin as the sun set, sharing pieces of their lives. She learned that he'd worked ranches from Texas to Montana, that he could read and write better than most cowboys thanks to a schoolteacher who'd taken an interest in him as a boy, that he had a talent for breaking horses because he'd learned to read their moods. He discovered that she knew all the constellations, that she could recite poetry from memory, that she secretly dreamed of traveling to New York or San Francisco someday. By unspoken agreement, they still maintained separate sleeping arrangements, Nathan on a pallet near the stove, Josephine in the bed, but the initial awkwardness between them had given way to a growing companionship. On the morning of their wedding, Josephine woke to the sound of women's voices outside the cabin. Mrs. Henderson and several of the ranch wives had arrived, arms laden with food and flowers. "Can't have a wedding without proper preparations," Mrs. Henderson announced, sweeping in like a benevolent whirlwind. The women quickly transformed the small cabin, hanging garlands of wildflowers, laying out a special lunch, and helping Josephine prepare for the ceremony. As Mrs. Henderson helped her with her hair, Josephine voiced the worry that had been growing all week. "This isn't fair to him," she said quietly. "Nathan deserves a real marriage, not this arrangement." The older woman's hands were gentle as she pinned Josephine's hair. "Life isn't always fair, child. But sometimes it's kind in unexpected ways." She met Josephine's eyes in the small mirror. "I've known Nathan Steele for 5 years, never seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you." "He barely knows me," Josephine protested. "Some people recognize what they need when they see it, Mrs. Henderson replied simply, "Others take years to figure it out. Give it time." She secured the last pin and stepped back to admire her work. There, beautiful as a sunrise. The ceremony itself was simple, held after Sunday services in the small white church in town. Most of the Double J hands attended, along with various townspeople curious about the sudden marriage. Nathan stood at the altar in his best shirt, his usually tousled hair neatly combed, his expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. As Josephine walked down the aisle on her father's arm, a tradition she'd been tempted to forego, but ultimately honored, her eyes locked with Nathan's. The warmth in his gaze steadied her, reminding her that whatever had brought them to this moment, they were in it together now. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, his voice filling the small church, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The familiar words washed over Josephine as she stood beside Nathan, acutely aware of his presence, the slight tremor in his hands as they exchanged rings. Simple bands he'd purchased with what must have been the last of his savings. The earnestness in his voice as he repeated his vows, the gentle way he held her hands when it was time to speak her own. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher concluded. "You may kiss the bride." A hush fell over the congregation. This was the moment Josephine had both anticipated and dreaded, their first touch of intimacy performed before an audience. Nathan leaned forward hesitantly, his eyes asking permission. Josephine gave a slight nod, and he pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was brief but unexpectedly tender. As he pulled away, a blush crept into his cheeks, matched by the warmth Josephine could feel in her own face. The congregation erupted in cheers and well wishes, and suddenly they were surrounded by people offering congratulations. Through it all, Nathan kept her hand firmly in his, a silent promise of support. The celebration continued at the ranch with a feast prepared by Mrs. Henderson and the other women. There was music and dancing, and for a few hours, Josephine almost forgot the circumstances that had brought her and Nathan together. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch yard, Nathan found her sitting alone on the porch steps, watching the celebration continue without her. "Tired?" he asked, sitting beside her. She nodded, suddenly nervous about the night ahead. They were truly married now. What would he expect? As if reading her thoughts, Nathan spoke softly. "Nothing has to change tonight, Josephine, or any night until you're ready, if ever." Relief flooded through her, followed by an unexpected twinge of disappointment she wasn't quite ready to examine. "Thank you," she said instead. He smiled, his shoulder brushing against hers as he gestured toward the festivities. "They're happy for us, for you especially. You've made quite an impression this week." "They've been kind," she agreed. "Kinder than I expected, given the circumstances." "People respect courage," Nathan said simply, "and you've shown plenty of that." Before she could respond, a commotion at the edge of the gathering caught their attention. Harlan Voss had arrived, flanked by two of his men. The music faltered, then stopped entirely as he made his way through the crowd toward the newly married couple. Nathan stood, positioning himself slightly in front of Josephine. "Voss," he acknowledged coldly, "didn't expect to see you here." "Couldn't miss the celebration of true love," Voss replied sarcastically. "I brought a wedding gift." He held out an envelope. Nathan made no move to take it. "Whatever it is, we don't want it." Voss smiled thinly. "Oh, I think you do. It's the deed to that piece of creekside property that was meant to be your bride's inheritance. The piece her father so generously donated to my holdings." Josephine gasped softly. Nathan's posture stiffened further. "Why would you give that back?" Nathan demanded suspiciously. Voss shrugged. "Consider it a gesture of goodwill. After all, we're going to be in business together for quite some time, given your debt to me." His eyes slid to Josephine. "And I always like to maintain good relations with my debtors' families." The implication that he still held power over them through the debt was clear. Nathan's jaw tightened, but he reached for the envelope. "If this is truly the deed, then we accept, but don't mistake it for anything other than returning what was wrongfully taken." Voss's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Enjoy your wedding night," he said, his gaze lingering inappropriately on Josephine before he turned and strode away, his men following. The celebration resumed slowly, but the mood had been dampened by Voss's appearance. As darkness fell, guests began to depart, offering final congratulations to the couple. Abraham was the last to approach them. He looked nervously between his daughter and new son-in-law. "I'll be heading back to our old place tomorrow," he announced. "Mr. Johnston's letting me use the wagon." "You're not staying at the ranch?" Josephine asked, surprised. Abraham shook his head. "No, it's better this way. I need to face what's left of our home, see what can be salvaged." He hesitated before adding, "And I need to start making things right. Beginning with giving you two some space to figure out your marriage without my shadow hanging over it." It was perhaps the most insightful thing Josephine had ever heard her father say. "Will you be all right out there alone?" "I'll manage," he assured her. "And it's not so far that I can't visit if you'll have me." "You're always welcome," Nathan said firmly before Josephine could respond. "Your family now." Abraham's eyes grew moist. He clasped Nathan's hand gratefully before turning to embrace his daughter. "I don't deserve either of you," he whispered in her ear, "but I'm going to try to earn my place in your lives." After everyone had gone, Josephine and Nathan walked back to their cabin in silence, the weight of the day and the night ahead heavy between them. Inside, someone had lit lamps and left a small wedding supper on the table. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, and the bed had been made with new linens. "Hungry?" Nathan asked, removing his formal jacket and hanging it carefully on a peg. "A little," Josephine admitted, though her stomach was too knotted with nerves to feel true hunger. They ate quietly, the domesticity of sharing a meal in their own home both strange and comforting. When they finished, Nathan cleared the dishes, then stood awkwardly in the middle of the room. "I can sleep in the barn tonight," he offered, Give you some privacy." Josephine shook her head. "No, that's not necessary. This is your home too." She gestured to his pallet by the stove. "Your usual arrangement is fine." Relief crossed his features, though something else flickered in his eyes' disappointment, perhaps. He nodded. "I'll step outside while you get ready for bed, then." When he returned, Josephine was already under the covers. Her wedding dress hung carefully over the room's single chair. Nathan banked the fire in the stove, then settled onto his pallet, pulling a blanket over himself. "Good night, Mrs. Steele," he said softly into the darkness. The name, her new name, sent an unexpected thrill through her. "Good night, Nathan," she replied. Sleep was elusive for Josephine that night. She lay awake, listening to Nathan's steady breathing across the room, wondering about the strange path that had led her to become his wife. What had started as a desperate act of rescue had transformed into something else over the past week, something with potential, with hope. She thought of Mrs. Henderson's words, "Some people recognize what they need when they see it." Was that what had happened with Nathan? Had he somehow seen something in her worth saving, worth sacrificing for, beyond just the moral imperative to help someone in distress? And what did she see in him? A good man, certainly. Kind, honorable, hardworking. But also something more, a quiet strength that made her feel safe, a gentle humor that emerged when he was comfortable, a dedication to his principles that had led him to throw down his hat and declare, "I'll pay with love." As dawn began to lighten the sky outside their window, Josephine made a decision. She would approach this marriage not as an arrangement of convenience or an obligation, but as an opportunity. An opportunity to build something real with the man who had risked everything to save her. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm. Nathan worked the ranch during the days while Josephine established their household and began taking in sewing work from the other ranch families. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation, gradually learning each other's habits and preferences, building a foundation of friendship that grew stronger with each passing day. Nathan made the first payment to Voss a month after their wedding, riding into town alone despite Josephine's offer to accompany him. He returned with a tight expression that softened only when she met him at the door with fresh coffee and cornbread. "It went well enough," he reported as they sat at their small table. Voss was his usual charming self, but the payments made and recorded properly. "How many more?" she asked, having done the calculations in her head many times. 11, he answered. "Unless we can find a way to pay more faster." He reached across the table to take her hand, a gesture that had become more natural between them. "We will find a way, Josephine. I promised you freedom, and you'll have it." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. "I know we will," she assured him, "and I want you to know something." She took a deep breath. "When the debt is paid, I don't plan to go anywhere." Surprise and cautious hope flashed across his face. "No," she shook her head, squeezing his hand. "This marriage may have started under unusual circumstances, but it's real to me now, unless—" A sudden doubt seized her. "Unless you still want your freedom when this is over." "No," he said quickly, then smiled at his own eagerness. "I mean, I'm right where I want to be, Josephine, with you." The atmosphere between them shifted subtly after that conversation. The careful distance they'd maintained began to close. Their touches lingered longer, a hand on a shoulder, fingers brushing while passing dishes, a brief embrace before Nathan left for work each morning. One evening in late summer, as they sat outside watching fireflies dance over the prairie, Nathan turned to her with unusual seriousness. "I've been thinking about that land Voss returned, your mother's land." Josephine nodded. They'd visited the property once since their wedding, a beautiful stretch along a creek that remained green even in the summer heat, with ancient cottonwoods providing shade and birdsong filling the air. "What about it?" she prompted when he didn't continue. Nathan took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I thought we might build there, our own place. Not right away, we still have Voss's debt to clear, but someday." The vision he painted made her breath catch. A small house nestled among the trees, a vegetable garden, perhaps a few horses and cattle of their own. A home. Their home. "I'd like that very much," she said softly. His eyes met hers, filled with an emotion that made her heart race. "Josephine," he began, his voice rough with feeling. I know our beginning wasn't traditional, but I want you to know that what I feel for you now, it's real, more real than anything I've ever felt. Nathan, she whispered, understanding what he was trying to say. What she felt too, but had been afraid to name. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Josephine met him halfway, her lips finding his in a kiss that held none of the hesitance of their wedding day. This was a kiss born of genuine feeling, of choice rather than obligation. When they finally parted, both breathless, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I think maybe I have since I saw you standing up to Voss that day, refusing to be broken." Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes. "I love you too," she admitted. "I didn't expect to, but here we are." That night, when they returned to their cabin, Nathan moved toward his pallet out of habit. Josephine caught his hand, stopping him. "Stay with me," she invited softly. "Be my husband in truth, not just in name." The love that passed between them that night transformed their marriage completely. What had begun as an act of rescue became a union of equals, of partners who had chosen each other despite the unconventional circumstances of their beginning. The following spring, as wildflowers carpeted the prairie in vibrant color, they made the final payment to Harlan Voss. Nathan insisted that Josephine accompany him to town for this momentous occasion, wanting her to witness the moment they would truly be free. Voss received them in his office with his usual cold demeanor, though there was a flicker of surprise when Nathan counted out not just the scheduled payment but the entire remaining balance. "Well, well," Voss drawled, examining the money. "How enterprising." "I assume business has been good at the Double J." "Good enough," Nathan replied neutrally. The truth was more complex. They had worked incredibly hard, Nathan taking on extra jobs breaking horses for neighboring ranches, Josephine expanding her sewing business to include customers in town. Abraham, too, had contributed, selling off pieces of equipment they didn't need and working odd jobs whenever he could find them. Even Mr. Johnston had helped, advancing Nathan's wages when they were close to having enough. "I believe this concludes our business," Nathan said firmly, holding out his hand for the paid contract. Voss hesitated, clearly reluctant to relinquish his hold over them. Finally, with a thin smile, he handed over the document. "So it does, for now." His eyes lingered on Josephine. "Life has a way of bringing people back into each other's orbits, Mrs. Steele. Remember that." "The only thing I'll remember," Josephine replied evenly, "is that some debts can be paid with money. Others, like honor and decency, seem permanently beyond your reach, Mr. Voss." Nathan's laugh of surprise and pride warmed her as they left Voss's office. Outside, he lifted her off her feet in an embrace that drew smiles from passers-by. "You are magnificent," he declared, setting her down gently. "And you're right about him." "It doesn't matter anymore," Josephine said, feeling truly free for the first time in years. "He has no power over us now." They celebrated that night with a small gathering at their cabin. Mr. and Mrs. Johnston, Abraham, Mrs. Henderson, and several of the hands who had become friends. As they shared food and stories under the stars, Josephine looked around at the community that had embraced her, at the father who was slowly earning back her trust, and finally at the husband who had thrown down his hat and declared, "I'll pay with love." He had paid, certainly with money, with hard work, with patience. But what he had given her most of all was the freedom to choose her own path, and she had chosen him. Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their cabin, Nathan traced gentle patterns on her shoulder. "I've been thinking," he said softly. Josephine prompted sleepily. "Maybe it's time to start building on your mother's land. Mr. Johnston says I've earned a stake in the next cattle drive. Between that and what we've saved, we could make a start." Josephine turned in his arms to face him. "Our own place," she mused. "It sounds perfect." "There's something else," Nathan added, a note of nervousness entering his voice. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned that Dr. Wilson is looking for someone to help with record keeping at his office. Thought you might be interested, with your figures being so good and all." Josephine blinked in surprise. Women working in a doctor's office was still uncommon, especially in small western towns. "You wouldn't mind if I worked outside our home?" "Why would I mind?" he asked genuinely. "You're smart, Josephine. Too smart to spend all your days just keeping house, if that's not what you want." The understanding in his words, the recognition of her as a person with ambitions beyond traditional expectations, filled her with a love so intense it almost hurt. "I married a remarkable man," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his lips. "I married a remarkable woman," he countered. "One who stood tall when life tried to break her, one who taught me that sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected beginnings." As they drifted towards sleep in each other's arms, Josephine thought about the strange journey that had brought them together. Her father's desperate attempt to trade her for debt had seemed like the end of her world. Instead, it had become the beginning of something beautiful, a love born of courage and honor, strengthened by shared struggle, and now free to grow into whatever they wanted it to be. And it had all started with a cowboy who threw down his hat and said, "I'll pay with love."